Hello, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading stories from a website called Liminal Earth. On this website, people submit their first-hand paranormal experiences. There are several different ways to traverse this website, but one of the ways is to go through the categories they've put together. These categories include classic UFO, cryptoids, mythologies, time distortion, dark forces, thin places, which I've actually done a video on already, strange animals, straight up ghosts, and lastly, high weirdness. The stories I'm reading tonight come from the high weirdness category, and before we get into them, let me just explain this term and this concept a little bit. So this is a bit of a twist on a term known as high strangeness. Liminal Earth likes to do a little bit of their own in-store branding. Another example is they have a category called cryptoids, which is a spin on cryptids. Anyway, the term high strangeness has been around since 1970, but it's become pretty popular in modern mainstream paranormal discussion, and it's used to describe instances and experiences that are markedly unusual, absurd, and, well, strange. Originally, this term was exclusive only to UFO encounters because it was coined by J. Allen Hynek, a famous astrophysicist and ufologist who was a scientific informant on U.S. government studies on UFOs such as Project Blue Book. He went on to write a lot of literature on UFO reports and encounters, and he developed a system of quantitative criteria on a report's credibility. These were known as the probability rating and the strangeness rating. Basically, he had a scale of strangeness, and taking details of a particular report into consideration, it would be placed on a scale of low strangeness to high strangeness. Here's an explanation of the strangeness rating from his book, The UFO Experience, from 1972. The strangeness rating is, to express it loosely, a measure of how oddball a report is within its particular broad classification. More precisely, it can be taken as a measure of the number of information bits the report contains, each of which is difficult to explain in common sense terms. A light seen in the night sky, the trajectory of which cannot be ascribed to a balloon, aircraft, etc., would nonetheless have a low strangeness rating, because there's only one thing strange about the report to explain: its motion. A report of a weird craft that descended to within 100 feet of a car on a lonely road, caused the car's engine to die, its radio to stop, and its lights to go out, left marks on the ground nearby, and appeared to be under intelligent control, receive a high strangeness rating, because it contains a number of separate, very strange items, each of which outrages common sense. Anyway, that's the background of this term. I find that all to be very interesting, and I like to try and be as informative as possible, but all you really need to know is that the stories tonight are strange, and that's what we love here. The weirder, the better. So, with all that said, let's get started. The first story we're going to read was submitted by Iseni S., and it takes place in Saskatchewan in September 2015. By the way, another fun feature of Liminal Earth is people include the location of their experience. So while I read the story, I'll be showing Google Earth Street View of the location. The story is called Saskatchewan Time Slip. One night, about 6 p.m. September 2015, I was driving from Regina to the rural town where I live, about 40 miles away on a road with scattered farms. There was very little traffic, if any, that I remember. A trip I have taken hundreds of times, just a straight, dark road with only vehicle headlights for illumination. I was humming to myself and just thinking, as you do, without a radio. I suddenly thought it was taking a long time to reach my turnoff, and it wasn't there. I thought I had somehow missed it in the dark, so I would have to drive to the next town, which was Indian Head, population 2,000, and turn around. I was mad at myself, so I drove the next 10 miles, but when I got to where Indian Head was supposed to be, it was totally different. There were 2 big gas stations across from each other, where a small motel was before, and they were lit up like Christmas trees. The whole town looked lit up with lots of new buildings. I was very disturbed and thought I was losing my mind. I thought that somehow I was going in the wrong direction. I was feeling afraid and confused. I decided to keep on driving. I drove for perhaps another 20 miles, but nothing was familiar until I came to the town of Wolseley. I crossed the highway and sat on the side of the road, trying to figure things out. I knew that my town wasn't this far out of Regina, so I decided to go back and drive very slowly. Eventually, I saw the Indian Head turn off, exactly as it should be. No lights, little motel, modest gas station opposite. I was so relieved. I drove on to my turnoff, exactly as it should be, and went home. I can't even speculate what happened. They have since made major changes to the highway, but nothing like the changes I saw. So, time slips are a quality or a feature of high strangeness stories, and I find them to be very interesting. Time is one of the major ways we structure our reality, and in that way, it is a construct of the modern world. I'm sure you've heard people say, time isn't real, time is a construct. And what they mean is that, sure, time passing is real, but the way that we view time has been crafted to work for us. For example, daylight savings time. It's 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and then for some reason the next day, just because the season changes or the day changes, now it's 7 o'clock the next day. And time zones. And some states and countries don't do daylight savings time. So time, as in time on a clock, is different everywhere. So we have made it up in that way. And since it is such a way that we grasp onto reality, when we lose time or have a time slip, it's very jarring, I would imagine. I've never experienced it. And if you don't know what I mean, we'll have more stories about time slips coming up later. But just the concept of losing time, since it is so rooted in our daily life, experiencing a time slip is very jarring and then also fascinating. It also makes me think of fairies, because it's very common talk among fairies that if, say, you were to visit fairy, or if you were to enter the realm of fairy, you might feel like you pass an hour there, and then when you come out, days could have gone by, such as Rip Van Winkle. You know, that's a classic time slip, time distortion story. So is it fairies? Is it aliens? Is it ripples in dimensions? Who knows? But it's very, very interesting to me. The next story takes place in Portland in 1990. It was submitted by Janet B., and it's called Wrong Door. I was looking after my elderly parents at their house in North Portland. One night, at about 3 a.m, I woke up needing to go to the bathroom, which was downstairs. I opened the stairwell door and could feel the air pressure had changed. Curious, I opened the door to the living room, and the sound of the living room was wrong. It sounded like I had walked onto a stage. I looked to see the far wall of the living room had disappeared, and a misty sort of landscape was seen in the distance. 3 odd-looking creatures stood in the living room, and one hissed at me. I just continued walking to the bathroom, shaking like a leaf. I stayed there for half an hour until I could bring myself to open the door. Walking out, I could see all was back to normal. Weird. Yeah, that is weird. I do wish they had taken a little bit of time to describe the misty landscapes and the odd creatures they had seen a little bit. I would have appreciated a little bit more description of those elements of this story. But I really like that story. It's simple and short, but I can understand why this experience would be unnerving. And it makes me want to mention the Oz factor. This is another term like high strangeness that goes back to UFO theories and research. This one is by Jenny Randles, who is an author known for her books on ufology and things of that nature. By the way, do you guys say ufology or ufology? I think I kind of go between the two. So, Jenny Randles, in one of her books, explains the Oz factor as the sensation of being isolated or transported from the real world into a different environmental framework. And it's named after the Wizard of Oz, of course, in which the main character Dorothy is transported into another world. So let's go into that a bit more. Here's an excerpt from an essay I found on high strangeness, and it's called Deep, Weird, High Strangeness, Boggle Thresholds, and Damned Data in Academic Research on Extraordinary Experience by Jack Hunter. And if you want to read that, I'm going to reference this essay throughout the episode, or I'm going to bring it up again. But if you want to read the whole thing, I will have a link to it in my source list, which is always included in the description of the video. So, in this essay, Jack Hunter says, "The Oz factor is common to many paranormal experiences and often precedes the climactic encounter, whether with a UFO in the sky, Bigfoot in the woods, a gnome-like entity in the garden, or an angel in your bedroom." Randles, Jenny Randles, who we just mentioned, defines it as a set of symptoms which create the impression of temporarily having left our material world and entered another dreamlike place with magical rules. It tells us, most notably, that the percipient has changed their state of consciousness. The result is a dreamy and weirdly silent state of mind that is recognized as peculiar, even though they do not appreciate what it implies. So, the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because they mention in the story that they walk into their living room and the sound quality had noticeably changed from its normal state. And first of all, I think that's interesting because I think it's highly believable that it's something you would notice. We take for granted, the kind of acoustics of the rooms we are familiar with in our house and stuff. But if it were to change or be different, we would notice. You know what I mean? It's not something we're conscious of, but if it were to change, we would definitely take notice. And one of the symptoms or signs of the Oz factor is that there is almost like that sound of silence. Do you know what I mean? Kind of like this audible hushness. The sound changes as you are entering this weird reality or changing worlds. Who knows? I'm going to read a little bit more from Jenny Randles about the Oz factor because I just find it fascinating. So the following is from a serial newsletter from the British UFO Research Association, or BUFORA, which is something that Jenny Randles founded. So this is from the issue from July of 1987, and she's talking about the Oz factor. She actually puts together a little questionnaire that anyone who's interviewing or talking to someone who's had a experience of high strangeness could go through with the witness to kind of get more details. It's pretty interesting. So, here's what she says. One of the most common manifestations of the Oz factor comes in the case such as the following. The witness is traveling in a car down the M53 motorway when he notices an absence of traffic. This road is normally very busy. Suddenly, nobody else is around. He now observes a peculiar object beside him and has what might be called a close encounter. Nobody else in the area reports this object, although there are houses nearby. It is as if the witness has been isolated out from the rest of humanity to be a sole percipient in this experience. Loss of sensory or environmental activity can take different forms. For example, one woman who had a daylight encounter in Kent said that the sounds of the traffic on a nearby road suddenly became muted, as if she had been encased in a kind of glass dome that blocked them out. This lasted only during the UFO experience. Another witness, a man in Essex, likened the effect to being inside a room. When the UFO was gone, it was like opening the door and stepping into an adjacent room where a party was going on. Okay, that last bit is very interesting to me when it comes to our last story we read, right? Also, the fact that it's a story from so long ago, over 30 years, to me that adds validity to the story because it shows it's something that stuck with them over time. This small, strange experience had a lasting effect on them. Alright, with that, let's move on to the next story, which occurred around November 30th, 2020 in Seattle, Washington. This experience was submitted by Nicole, and it's called Disappearing Man. I was at Whole Foods to pick up an Amazon package because they have the pickup lockers right outside the entrance in the parking garage. I walked up to the lockers and there was a guy standing right in front of the lockers, just staring straight ahead. He didn't acknowledge me, so I asked him if he needed help. Nothing. Didn't seem like he heard me at all, just kept staring ahead, not blinking or moving. I decided to go inside the store to get an employee so they can call for medical or police help, and also so I can safely get my package. While talking with the employee, another shopper overheard me and said, "I'm glad you said something, because I saw him when I came in and thought it was creepy, and that was about 20 minutes ago." The employee came out with me and asked the man to leave, but he just kept staring. I get my package, then get in my car, which is parked right in front, so I can still see him. I saw the employee go back inside, probably to call for help. I looked down for maybe 3 seconds to start my car, looked back up, and he was gone. I saw the employee come back out looking confused. He walked around the parking garage to see where the guy went. There's nowhere he could have gone in a few seconds I was looking away. There was only a few other cars in the garage, none of which were occupied. The man was clean-cut, well-dressed, didn't look to be on drugs or in distress. He just simply vanished after standing and staring at the same spot for 30-plus minutes. Time traveler? Ghost? Dimension jumper? It still haunts me to this day. Hey, 2020 was a weird year, to say the least. Brains, lives, and economies were scrambled. Who's to say realities weren't scrambled as well? I've got a short one for you next, submitted by Dick. It took place around 1977 in Jackson, Mississippi. It's called Masked Creeper. I woke up early in the morning and looked towards the door of my room. There was another bed on that side of the room next to the door. Under the foot of that bed was a face. It appeared to be someone in a cheap Halloween mask. I assumed it was my older brother. I was about 7 at the time. So I said, "I can see you and you can't scare me." The figure didn't move, so I tried the usual kid reaction. I said, "I'll tell Mom if you don't leave." Again, the figure didn't move. As I stared at the figure, I grew even more scared, and eventually I hid under the covers. The next morning, there was nothing under the bed that I would have mistaken for a figure. Creepy. I like how this combines two classic fear-based tropes, under the bed and masks. I'm imagining a child-sized person under the bed in this story. I don't know if that's because they mentioned that they thought it was their brother at first. Cheap Halloween masks were made forever terrifying to me through the classic Goosebumps episode, The Haunted Mask. God, that scared the shit out of me. So that was the last story I had for tonight from Liminal Earth. But I do want to read a few more excerpts from that essay I mentioned earlier. So here's another excerpt from that essay by Jack Hunter. Deep weird, high strangeness, boggle thresholds, damn data, you know. By the way, I stumbled upon an interview with him from this podcast called Spirit Box, and I was brand new to this podcast. I think it was like the second or third episode I had listened to from it. I found it researching something else, something completely different, and then I was looking through their episodes, and every episode it seems they interview someone, usually like a folklorist or anthropologist or someone with a specialty in like UFOs that covers paranormal topics. It's really cool. I recommend it. But I was just scrolling through the episodes to see what I wanted to listen to next, and I saw that there was an interview with Jack Hunter, and I was like, wow. And so I listened to it, and it was a super cool interview. It was super cool. He talks about fairies and I can't really remember what else. Fairies was the main thing that was interesting to me. But I will put that, a link to that in my source list. And then also, if you want to read more of his stuff, I will include a link to his website in my source list as well, which has all of the essays he's written, articles, appearances on podcasts. Definitely recommend looking into it if you are interested in reading about this kind of stuff. So, let's read a little bit more from Jack Hunter's essay. The following narrative was sent to me by an informant who was looking for help making sense of an extraordinary encounter he and a friend had while walking in the wilderness, not far from his friend's home. My informant has given permission for the following extracts from his initial message to me to be included in this paper. He explains how he and his friend were walking away from the house, down a path towards the surrounding woodland, when, quote, both of us immediately saw something out of place, below 30 to 40 feet away from us, in between the trees. There was something tall, white, and three-dimensional. It appeared to be completely white and soft, like light, but it did not illuminate the trees or the ground around it. It was shaped in an upside-down V, or U. It was so white that you could see the shadow being cast on it while it was swaying, like a real animal. It was making creepy swaying movements with its whole body. It was moving from left to right in a specific motion, standing on the forest floor in the same area, between the trees, making absolutely no sound, and there was absolutely no wind. It was beautiful to look at, but terrifying at the same time. We watched it in silence as it was swaying, and I started to feel impending doom, the sinking feeling in your chest, set in. And I felt like I was going to die or something bad was going to happen. I told my friend specifically, I don't like this. He agreed, and we immediately left the forest. End quote. I love that experience. The setting, being in the woods, this glowing white V-shaped creature, it's pretty unlike anything I've heard of before as far as a first-hand encounter. Although you know what it kind of does remind me of are those Fresno Nightwalkers. Have you seen those? I think those are just like creepypasta, right? They're not real, but they're cute. It does kind of remind me of those just because it's like they are kind of V-shaped. They're white, but this is a really very interesting experience. In this essay also, Jack Hunter includes a quote from author Mike McClelland, who has written books about UFO encounters and specifically tying them to owls. I don't know if you've heard that. At least I've heard. I haven't read his books. I'd like to. But from what I know, I think owls have been mistaken for aliens before. I don't know, the big black eyes, they're level with your window. They can be. I mean, if you've looked into the eyes of an owl, it's beautiful, but it is a little unsettling. So I don't know what all he goes into with his book. Maybe owls are tied in to UFO sightings in other ways that I don't know. But there's a quote in this essay from Mike Cleland, and it says, quote, "The more complicated the interwoven details, the more valid it seems," end quote. Talking about first-hand experiences, I tend to agree with that. Just the more details there are, it seems more believable, right? It's not just a vague statement, although I guess people could implement details in to make it seem more convincing. I don't know. And it's hard to tell when you're just reading an account on a page. If you're listening to someone give their account, I think you could have a better idea of if they're being genuine or not, but I tend to agree with that. I mean, and that is kind of how the high strangeness scale is determined, right? It's more strange details. It's not just a light in the sky. It's the more details they are and the more specific and odd they are, then the higher it's going to get on that high strangeness level, right? And to me, it does make it seem more valid when there's more details. This is another experience included in the Jack Hunter essay. It's from the Religious Experience Research Center archive database, which, quote, holds an archive with around 6,000 accounts of first-hand spiritual experiences sent to the center since its foundation in 1969, end quote. Which you have to have a membership to access. Otherwise, I would be combing through this database as we speak. So, this is the experience that Jack Hunter included in his essay. On Friday, a man came to clean the carpet and curtains in the drawing room. Later on, there was a complete fusing of everything electrical. Clocks, radios, refrigerator, freezer, TV, all the lights, etc. In the evening, I lay down on a sofa, closed my eyes, and tried to relax. I then saw several little green men with very unpleasant expressions. They were looking at me. They seem to be at a distance. I suppose gnomes or goblins would be an adequate description. I didn't like what I saw, and I was reminded of the time I had a rheumatic illness when I was 7 and had been very alarmed by the little green men I had seen then. Hallucinations, presumably. Date of experience, 1951. Female. Hey, this story is kind of similar to the Paper Man story from the previous video I just made on non-human entities. I don't want to spoil too much, but there are some elements that are similar between the two stories. Anyway, very interesting. I, of course, love a story featuring goblin-like creatures. Listen, this stuff is fun to think about, to talk about, and to listen to videos about and read about. That's why you're here, right? You don't have to believe in all of these stories and all of these ideas and paranormal concepts, but it's fun. I think so. It's a way to add color to our experience of life, which can sometimes, if not often, be quite bleak and dull. Another author on parapsychology, Renee Haynes, who came up with a threshold of her own, not dissimilar from the strangeness scale, called the boggle threshold. Quote, the point at which the mind boggles. In an article she wrote on this topic, she says, quote, it is necessary for human beings to try to make sense of everything that happens, to account in comprehensible, logical terms for all that goes on, end quote. That is very, very true. And on the positive side, it's the reason we, as a species, have collected so much information. But on the downside, it's caused some of us to be unable to suspend judgment or else lose our minds. I'm not one of those people. I appreciate and even crave mystery in the world around me. But that's all the mystery I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I hope your night is pleasant and peaceful, but also perhaps just a little bit strange. Until next time.